Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to chat with you guys a little bit about why many powerlifters don't do enough high reps and why it's to their detriment. Because this is something we see a lot of, and one of the jokes you'll see out there when the topic of reps will come up, you'll see a lot of powerlifters will say 5 reps, like more than 5 reps, that's cardio. Right? They'll say things like that. And a lot of them don't have enough GPP or conditioning on top of it. And again, I'm not talking about everyone, and I'm not saying some guys haven't been very successful doing this, but the simple reality is powerlifters don't do enough rep work. And what you actually find is that when you look at a lot of the champions out there, some of the best, you'd be shocked how much almost bodybuilder type training many of them do in regards to hypertrophy. And the reason you see this though is that because a lot of powerlifters over the years have observed that many bodybuilders tend to be really big and really weak, right? A lot of them are really weak, particularly for their size. And I think this can create some bias out there because again, a lot of lifters look at that and go, well, I don't want a bunch of useless hypertrophy, right? I don't want a bunch of useless hypertrophy. And that's what these guys have. They can't do anything with it. What's the point? It must be the fact that they're doing all this rep work. And the truth is, it's not all the rep work that causes it. It's number one, they've never learned how to use the muscle that they have, right? They've never learned to use the muscle that they have because they don't do heavy singles. They don't strain. Number two, sometimes the excessive amount of substances they put in their body can create a disproportionate amount of size versus strength ratio. There's been some studies showing that happens. It's not that they don't get stronger with the size, it's that when heavy amounts of anabolics are used, you grow sometimes faster than your strength goes up. And there's a lot of theories as to why that is. You also have to factor in a lot of them put a disproportionate amount of time into show muscles that maybe don't carry over to performance to big lifts as much, and then they neglect a lot of the muscles that are necessary, meaning they might be big, but they're not always maximally developed everywhere, right? A lot of bodybuilders, if you notice, sometimes many of them have weak mid backs, lower backs, hamstrings, things like that. They might have big quads and everything look big from the front, but many of them neglect their entire posterior chain. Many of them really neglect their back other than maybe the lats. And so therefore they tend to be much weaker. Sometimes they have weak cores. Maybe they haven't done enough work, heavy work, while standing. And maybe they have a weak core, right? That's actually relatively common in that world. Then you have the fact that they put all the site enhancement and stuff in muscles, which will tend to make you a lot bigger. That's not true muscle growth. And most bodybuilders use very large amount of site enhancement in their arms, shoulders, pecs, things like that. So again, they look bigger than they technically are because it's not actual muscle in there always. So these things can create this myth that's not always true. And the truth is, though, when you see a lot of guys who are jacked bodybuilders, who are fully developed, who do start doing some heavy training, they are just as strong as powerlifters. Sometimes even pound for pound. So again, there are these myths that are created, and what you'll see with that is again, a lot of powerlifters are afraid of higher reps for that reason. They're like, it doesn't make me stronger. What's the point? Can't I just do more fives, more threes, things like that instead of doing these 10s, 12s, 15s? Right? You'll see that mentality. But the truth is, again, that's harder to recover from. Beats your joints and everything up to do very large amounts of triples. If you were to try to equal the volume, and we've got studies showing that it does equal the volume for size. Once volume is equated, threes can build just as much muscle as tens. But it's harder to recover from. It leaves you feeling more beat up, and it takes double to triple the gym time. You can get so much more work done and recover from it when you do higher reps. Also, there's lots of exercises that lend themselves much better to high reps. I mean, so some of the stuff that I'm doing in this video are perfect examples. Right, do you really want to try to do a bunch of threes and fives on your good mornings? Or even like, give me here, dips, reverse hypers? No. 10s, 15s, 20s, 25s on a lot of these movements are going to be more effective for maintaining perfect form. or getting the most work done than on the muscles that you want to target. Okay? We have to get bigger if we want to get stronger. And what you find is that usually, barring a few genetic freaks, the power lifters who put the most effort into just getting as jacked as possible and getting big as possible, particularly in the right places. Obviously, it has to be in the muscles that are helping you move the weights the most. Meaning you can't be neglecting your back or posterior chain. Those need a high priority, obviously. But we need to get as jacked as possible if we want to be as strong as possible. And there's an enormous amount of data confirming that at this point. It's being studied pretty closely. And I think if you look at even what Minnow said, Minnow Hanselman, and I know people are going to say, Jason, have you laughed about the way he trains? Yeah, I have. Doesn't mean he's not a good source of information, even if he trains like a weak pussy. Because he does, and that's why he's a weak pussy, because he trains like one. But his information is still good, and I happen to enjoy it. Even he said, looking at some of the recent studies, he's like, man, you can go to powerlifting meets based upon all this data that's emerging, and we could probably just DEXA scan everyone and just skip the actual lifting because we already know how they're going to place. What? Yeah. And that's looking at the different studies that have looked at size versus strength. In other words, he was saying that as an expert himself, that looking at the data, it would be a lot less hassle to just DEXA scan the powerlifters at a meet. And the one who has the most muscle relative to their leverages is they're going to place in that order anyway. So we could just determine probably who's going to win ahead of time. And he's largely correct, barring a few exceptions. There's a few outliers in the statistics, but for 95% of them, that data would actually perfectly place how they're going to place in comp. It would be a complete overlap. You only get like one guy in 20 who would break that mold. And those are some genetic freaks. Same thing I've said before. A lot of these guys looked at the studies, Knuckles and other people looked at all this big study they did. And they had determined that they could determine your max squat based off nothing but a DEXA scan pretty much. And some calculations it calculated for your height relative to the amount of lean tissue that you showed up on the DEXA scan, and they could calculate within 10% your max squat. And it was across the board. They took powerlifters, bodybuilders, everyone else, as long as they were proficient at the squat. And they could get it within 90%, guess their actual max when they tested it. Predictive. Now, people jump and say, well, the deadlift is totally different. We're talking about the squat and the bench press. That's the reason placings could be different based upon muscle mass. The deadlift is the odd man out. In other words, the deadlift does not follow this pattern. But the other two lifts do. The other two lifts do. The deadlift is less reliant on total muscle mass and more reliant on leverages and specific angles and specific muscles being overdeveloped relative to your frame. But if you get bigger, your deadlift will still go up. It's just the difference is the deadlift, it's possible to have a monstrous deadlift without being monstrously built if and only if you have the right leverages for the deadlift. Okay. For a guy who doesn't have perfect deadlift leverages, they're going to have to get super jacked to get their deadlift up also. But that's fine because their squat will come up too. And that's the other thing that you notice too. The guys who have the monstrous deadlift who aren't as jacked still can't squat. They might have good squats, but they're not, world-class level squats. And you see that frequently. And that's usually when you see guys whose squat and deadlift are 200 or more pounds apart. Okay, that's what you're seeing. That's a guy who's just built to deadlift. And they are out there. So it tends to be the odd man out. But for the other lifts, size equals strength potential. And before people jump and say, well, what about some of these Chinese lifters? It's like, well, they fit the same mold too. A lot of them are 8% body fat at 5'4". And if you run them through the DEXA scan, you're going to find that even though they might be a 5 to 10% higher than you might predict due to elite genetics in certain ways, they still follow the same pattern. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.